you everyone for joining us here today to talk about Hyland Cloud migrations. My name is John Swisher. I'm Vice President of Sales and Product at Kiriworks. And with me I have Dan Smith, our Senior Sales Engineer and resident cloud expert, if you will. Now, we're here to talk about a lot within the cloud, right? And I think from an order of operations standpoint, it's good to talk about the benefits of the cloud, hopefully educate some folks, ease any concerns folks may have, describe the process, and then lastly go through some of the things you can do to prepare to migrate to the cloud. Now, obviously, we're not going to get into the details of all of the architecture of the Hyland Cloud on this webinar, but you're watching this. We wanted to make sure we were putting up a quick slide for you to take a screenshot if you needed. Now, again, this webinar is being recorded. You'll have access to this along with the slide deck. We wanted to make sure we were throwing this up for the true IT folks in the room that want to be able to see this architecture. Now, I think it makes sense to kind of begin with the benefits of the cloud, right? I mean, why do organizations want to move to the cloud? My point of view is because it allows you to focus on the true goals of your organization and offload the day-to-day responsibilities and tasks of managing your on-base system. Now, we're acutely aware that organizations of all shapes and sizes use on-base, and depending on the size of your organization or what you may be using on-base for, you may be saying to yourself, well, it's really not a huge lift to administer on-base today, and that's great if it isn't. Now, that may be the case, or it may be that you're not aware of all the things that folks on your on-base team or your IT team are likely doing for your on-premise on-base install. Moving forward into the benefits of the Hyland Cloud, and the first item that we have up there is to stay competitive. And when I hear that, I think along the lines of your competitors, other organizations in that same market, and in every industry, organizations are moving to the cloud, and the reason when they're doing so is a lot of the benefits we're about to go through, but all of those benefits those other organizations are receiving, you want to make sure you're receiving those same ones.
Yeah, I really think moving to the cloud allows you to stay agile and be able to move with the pace of your competitors.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And to take that even one step further, Dan, you have in here improving the customer experience. And from our standpoint, we look at customers as our true customers, right? We're in sales, but for a lot of our organizations, they see customers as their internal customers, their employees as well, the actual users of the solution beyond, maybe what you've exposed to your external customers.
Yeah.
Right? Additionally, increasing the business opportunities because of that. If you're able to, offload a lot of these responsibilities or the lower value tasks, the nurturing and feeding, that opens you up to take on new challenges, new opportunities, increase your business, right? And then you additionally have complying with regulations. Now, from yours and my standpoint, we talk a lot about healthcare and healthcare regulations and things like that. But I think we mean a slightly different type of regulation here.
Yeah, if we're thinking about offloading the hardware, the data center responsibility, if you will, Hyland Global Cloud Services is ISO certified, NIST certified, GDPR. So they're really doing a lot of work to stay compliant on the actual server administration and security around those servers within the data center.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's something that, they're pretty much the unsung heroes. It's a necessary evil that every organization needs to make sure they're staying on top of. And when you can offload a portion of those responsibilities, you ultimately end up freeing IT staff to innovate. So this kind of goes back to some of the previous points we're talking about. But again, taking those lower value tasks away allows you to further automate your solution, further expand your customer base and your business. And then again, this is kind of, along the same lines of OnBase. We at Kiriworks see OnBase as an application development platform, right? It's what we build all of our accelerators on. And one of the key points of our accelerators is flexibility. So that's from an OnBase perspective, but we take this up to the cloud, and we're very flexible because we don't have to worry about scaling. We don't have to worry about adding additional machines or resources. Hyland takes care of that for us, right?
Yeah, and they're constantly monitoring your solution to see if they need to add resources, or even think of security. The firewalls are constantly monitoring, making sure no one's getting access that shouldn't.
Yeah, and it dovetails perfectly into our next point. So the monitoring of performance, but also monitoring for security. So protected against intrusions, your data security. And the other thing I want to mention is this isn't even an exhaustive list. These are the items that Dan and I talk about on a daily basis. And along those same lines of security, people don't like to talk about security, but it's important. And when something inevitably happens, hopefully that is never the case, you need to ensure that your disaster recovery and availability strategy is taken care of. You're in charge of that today. In the future, from an OnBase perspective, Hyland's handling that for you.
Oh, definitely. And they have, with every service level they offer within the Hyland Cloud, they have a streaming nonstop backup of your solution, and then they also do a backup to another site of your solution. So there's multiple backups of your data, real time, constantly streaming from either internal of that data center or to another data center.
And then, lastly but not least, and again, I think we've kind of alluded to this point as well. We're kind of telling a story here, but something that isn't often talked about is the actual hardware. Everyone's using virtual machines these days. We fully understand that, but those virtual machines, part of a physical machine, right? And those machines need to be refreshed from time to time. And even the virtual machines and operating systems. I know we're talking about hardware here, but it's not only servers, switches, firewalls, all of those types of things that have a shelf life and need to be refreshed. That is taken away from you is no longer
the hardware and the licensing cost of the operating system, the database, all that's taken care of.
Yeah. So we've talked about a lot of the benefits of the Hyland Cloud, why you would want to take advantage of this cloud. And before we completely move forward, one of the things that I think is useful for people to see is all of the responsibilities within an OnBase solution. Now, there's a ton on here that maybe you're not doing, or maybe you weren't aware of, or maybe your IT team is taking care of for you. But there's a lot here, right? For responsibility of your OnBase system, responsibility for any line of business system that you're utilizing today. And what happens when we take that on-premise solution and we move it to the cloud? Well, the vast majority of those responsibilities are removed from you. And as you can see up here in the top, that small blue section is your responsibilities in the Hyland Cloud. And then all of the green items are the responsibilities of Hyland, leaving you responsible almost exclusively for your data and your solutions. And as we kind of look through the screen here, a lot of those different items are items that Dan and I just talked through. So we just finished up with your operating system expenses, but what we didn't get to was patching them, updating them, right? I don't think there are any large organizations out there that are just letting Windows updates run through freely, right? We haven't talked about security from an authentication standpoint, but that's a big one. That Hyland is helping folks out with. And then additionally, the operating systems we talked about the updating of them, but also some of that physical hardware. So your firewall, but also the configuration of it. We're talking about security and encryption, authentication, and then also the infrastructure. So we had our slide up that walked through the actual cloud infrastructure. And again, Hyland is taking all of that off your plate, as well as from a compliance and governance perspective. So, I mean, what are some things, Dan, that folks can examine prior to a migration to get an idea of, how cloud ready they are?
Yeah, so to take a step back, when you migrate to the Hyland Cloud, you are moving your servers off of your network into Hyland's network. So when we think about that, you need a way to connect to those servers. So if you think about thick client scanning, that's using direct database connection via the ODBC source to directly connect. You can't do that when your server's not on your network. So moving away from thick client scanning and thinking about the Unity client or disconnected scanning, or maybe even the web client for non-batch scanning. Authentication is going to be big. Again, you're moving your servers off your network, so Active Directory is no longer going to work. You can't connect to that domain. There's going to be no trust between the Hyland domain and your domain. But we do have the Hyland IDP, where you can connect to a single sign-on, or if you wanted to, you could even use LDAP and just enter in your network. Your users could enter in their network authentication directly into OnBase. So not using a single sign-on, but directly entering in their username and password every time. Batch printing. So a lot of our customers are using workflow to batch print contracts or batch print invoices, whatever it may be. Correspondence. Essentially hitting a network printer that's out there within your organization. Again, you're not going to be connected to the Hyland network. So we got to figure out a way to get that print data from the Hyland Cloud network back to our network so we can print it. So
where your printers are actually located.
Yeah. So if that's, sending a file or maybe changing the way we're doing things. Report services, if you're currently using that.
Recently,
yeah. So Hyland does now have reporting dashboards. So if you're using report services or third-party reporting tools, report services, again, is a direct database connection, so that won't be allowed and it's deprecated. But the reporting dashboards within the Unity client is really cool, really easy to use. It's visually pleasing. You can build some really nice reports. So start thinking about using that.
And it's the best part is it's all in the same application now in the Unity client or the web client. And the one thing I'll add about this, because I know a lot of our customers take advantage of reporting dashboards already. A lot of them still have report services. We do have a tool in the utility that we can take those reports out of your report services and re-put them into dashboards. So you won't be losing any of those. There's just a small, essentially lift to take them from one application.
A little bit of configuration there.
Yep.
Definitely. One of the bigger things are external data sources. If you're thinking about maybe some JavaScript you have within a form or actual scripts you're using within OnBase, workflow scripts, autofill keyword sets if you're doing a direct database lookups with your autofill keyword sets. Really anything that's looking at external sources. We have when we actually work with you, we have some SQL queries we could send you all to run that will give us a good list of all these that we can look at and start going down the road of converting, figuring out what we need to do to make it work within the Hyland Cloud.
In a nutshell, essentially any local system on your network that OnBase is speaking to today, those are the ones that we're going to want to look at and make sure that, does that communication work in the cloud in the future? And if not, let's get to a place where it does work so we're ready to go when we make that decision.
Again, any VB scripts or scripts you have within your solution, we're going to have to analyze those and see if there's anything going on that we need to rewrite. batch processes. So Hyland still has the batch processes within the cloud. There's just a matter of how are we going to get those documents to the processing folder to import. So we just need to reconfigure. Hyland Global Cloud Services uses a secure FTP service that we need to essentially use like a move it tool or some kind of tool to move those files up to the Hyland Cloud to be processed into OnBase. And then workflow actions. Again, thinking that we're outside of our network, we need to really look at any of those actions that are calling scripts, creating forms,
or exporting to a network share, for example.
Exactly, yeah. So we'll have to rethink that. You can still export. We would just need to do a secure FTP from the processing server that Hyland's now hosting down to your local network.
Now, one thing I would mention, what we're going to hit up next is what you can do now. So it has to do with a lot of what you're seeing on the screen. And you may be thinking, well, great, thanks, John, thanks, Dan. You just gave me a list. I don't know exactly what I'm looking for. And one of the things I want to ensure that folks are aware of is we do. That's the best part. Is we know what you need to look for. So after this, if this is something that you want to discuss a little bit further, again, as Dan referenced earlier, we have a couple of scripts that we can run in your on-premise environment to pull those back. So we know all the different workflow actions. We know where to look for those scripts. But the purpose of this is to make you aware of what that lift could potentially look like, because we want to get you guys ready as much as possible so that your transition to the cloud is as smooth as possible. So with that being said, what can you do now to prep your system?
Yeah, and the first thing we have on the list there is upgrade. So for smaller solutions, you may not need to do this, but for our larger solutions that do have scripting, they do have a lot of workflows, getting your OnBase solution up to a newer version will just remove a whole layer of potential issues that you might see when you migrate to the Hyland Cloud. So get upgraded and then just do a full transition from that same version to the Hyland Cloud and stay on the same version. So you're taking out any of those issues being an upgrade issue then.
Oh yeah, I mean it's complete order of operations, right? Make one change at a time. If we make a bunch of changes at once, it's kind of hard to figure out what may have went wrong in that scenario. Absolutely.
The next thing on the list would be moving to Unity or disconnected scanning for your batch scanning. And again, Unity or disconnected scanning. Why? There's no direct database connection. You're connecting through essentially the app server using a secure URL. So that will remove that thick client scanning from there. Again, thinking about authentication, moving, if you're using a single sign-on vendor, potentially moving all your OnBase users now, get them all authenticating through that single sign-on vendor now.
But that's a good point, because I know with some of our customers, they may be using a different authentication method with OnBase that they're maybe using from an organizational level, or maybe they're using the traditional OnBase authentication, and it's just something that, it's been working, so we haven't changed it, right? But OnBase can authenticate, again, through their IDP, through a number of different single sign-on options. So that's even something to where, if you're utilizing something today, call your account exec, call Dan, call me. We can help talk you through getting set up and preparing for a cloud migration.
Yeah, exactly. And I know a lot of the customers that I've talked to, this isn't a new thing. They're already using Amazon or Google Cloud or at Microsoft Azure. So switching over to the Azure Active Directory, and using that single sign-on should be an easy move for most of the OnBase administrators that are using Active Directory currently within their own network.
Yeah, and chances are, again, you're already using that single sign-on method elsewhere within your organization. OnBase can easily adopt that.
Yep. Again, we covered this, but reporting, moving over to dashboards, reporting dashboards within the Unity clients, all canned within that Unity client, point and click configurable. There's a bunch of data providers already built for like documents, workflow, workview, everything that you're using within Ombe. So it should be a easy transition over to that, and really try to stop using the SQL Management Studio.
Yeah, I mean that's something that we utilized a lot internally, that I did as well, and we kind of internally have been going through this methodology ourselves. And at first, I remember Dan and I talking, God, man, I don't like using it this way, but it's amazing how quick you get used to it. I remember when I first got an iPhone without the button, and I thought, man, this is going to take me forever to get used to. And what was it, less than a week, and we were used to writing our queries right in the dashboards configurator.
Oh yeah, you get used to it fast. The next two items on the list are very similar, but converting those direct database lookups to web services, we could say the same for the autofill keyword sets or any scripts essentially. Web services, there might be a larger upfront cost as far as hours developing a web services, but there's less administration down the line. So, kind of trying to choose between web services and a batch file. Look at those upfront costs. Also, if you want to do the batch file process, you got to think about real-time data lookups. So do you really need that data right now? Do you need to look up John Swisher's record right now? Or can it be every 12 hours, every 24 hours? And that's really how you determine whether you should build a web services application on the front end to look into those databases to do those queries versus a batch file and uploading that through the processing server that's hosted in the Hyland Cloud.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I would imagine, Dan, for every customer we've talked to about this, I would say about 90% would say, well, we need data that's live.
Yeah.
And after talking with them a little bit more and a little bit more, we find out, well, they don't really need it live. Maybe 12 hours, maybe 24 hours up to date. So that's why it's important that we brought this up from a batch file perspective. Is it as efficient as a web service? No. Are there potential administrative tasks or small administrative burden on a batch file over a web service? Absolutely. But the effort to create a batch process is normally a fraction of the web service. And the last thing that you and I were talking about before this that I wanted to make sure I mentioned to folks is there's nothing wrong with beginning with a batch process for the time being and then converting to a web service. That's a strategy that a lot of organizations use to get themselves cloud ready, and once they're in the cloud can then further optimize.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking of a conversation I had with one of our customers recently. They have multiple other systems that require web service, so they might already have them in place and not know that they're retrieving that same data for these other applications. So really, try to review your solutions and see what's out there. You might already have a web service already doing a lookup of that same data that you could just plug into OnBase.
That's an excellent point. I know within a lot of organizations, regardless of size, sometimes folks are siloed and they may just not be aware of those. So I think that's just an additional reason to help us. Let's get on site and we can run through a lot of these with you. Dan, these are all great points, and you probably get tired of hearing us say this, but this is not an exhaustive list, right? We have one, but if you could say what is one thing that organizations, OnBase administrators can do? What's one thing you would recommend for cloud readiness, for preparing themselves for the cloud?
Yeah, I would think cloud first and start administering your OnBase system as if you're in the Hyland Cloud now. It's only going to make it easier for when you convert over to the Hyland Cloud. So think cloud first. Even with all the projects you're doing, I know you're getting a lot of requests to add functionality to your OnBase system. Think cloud first always.
Yeah, absolutely. When we say think cloud first, I'm going back to, do you have operating system level access today to your on-base servers? You probably do, right? That's something you won't have in the cloud. So let's take advantage of the tools that we know we have today. Yep. One thing that comes into mind is essentially the built-in troubleshooting and diagnostics within the Unity client. Yeah. A lot of folks are used to Diagnostics Console, and that's a great tool, but now you can utilize it right from the client that you're already in today. And a lot of folks aren't taking advantage of that. And that's just another example of, we were just talking about the things that you actually end up adopting a lot quicker than you thought you would, being the, creating and testing your SQL queries right through reporting dashboards. So what did we learn today? We learned a lot. We learned about all of the different benefits of the Hyland Cloud. And if we had to sum that up, my thought is it's floating responsibility so that you can higher value tasks, right? And what are some things you can look at? I would say in a nutshell, Dan, it's any time that OnBase is communicating with another local line of business application. Those are the big ones. And that application could be File Explorer, right? Throwing files out there. It could be a lookup. It could be printing things to files. So we're happy to walk through all of those with you as well. And then what you can do now to prep your system. So you summed it up really well, Dan. It's like, act as if we were in the cloud. Start using it as if we're in the cloud, and that way we're fully adjusted when the time comes. And so what is the next step for these folks? Well, it's to get a hold of us. What are those next steps? Well, get a hold of Dan, get a hold of your account manager. And what we're going to do is set aside some time with you. We have a questionnaire that we're actually going to go through. We may ask you for some additional information, but the result of that questionnaire essentially gives you, for lack of a better word, a readiness score, right? And then we'll come back and walk through what you need to do to prepare yourself for the cloud and what Kiriworks can do to assist that.